Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
If you're sitting here with us right now, I want you to try and pull up the absolute earliest memory you have of a major news event.
Oh, that's an interesting exercise.
Right. Just think about what it was. Maybe it was a fleeting image on a screen or, I don't know, a photograph in a magazine left on a coffee table somewhere.
Yeah, usually those childhood glimpses of the wider world just sort of fade into the background noise of growing up.
Exactly. They blur. But today, we are looking at a first-hand audio account from a British news cameraman named Alan Florence. And his story takes that exact phenomenon, that lingering childhood memory, and it stretches it to a degree that honestly just defies logic.
It really does.
So our mission for this deep dive is to explore an incredible true story of historical serendipity. We're going to examine how a ghost-like 40-year-old memory of a post-war newsreel unexpectedly collided with a completely routine, everyday journalism assignment.
And it is a remarkable piece of source material because it sits right at this fascinating intersection of vast global history and deeply intimate personal memory.
Right.
Psychologists sometimes call these flashbulb memories.
Flashbulb memories, yeah.
You know, those instances where a specific, highly charged visual permanently burns itself into your neural pathways. You carry that singular image for your entire life. To then knock on a door for a totally mundane work assignment 4 decades later and have the literal subject of that ancient flickering footage open the door.
Sounds made up.
It sounds exactly like a contrived movie plot. But Alan's detailed audio account proves it is entirely, completely true.
So let's transport ourselves back to set the scene. The year is 1953, and we are in England. Alan Florence is just 10 years old.
Yeah.
And the context of this moment is absolutely vital.
Yeah, the cultural landscape was shifting massively.
Exactly. His father, like thousands of other people across the country, has just purchased the family's very first television set.
A huge deal back then.
Oh, massive. It's this heavy, glowing wooden box sitting in the corner of the living room. And the whole reason they bought it was to watch a massive cultural milestone, which was the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. For the very first time, the outside world is being beamed directly into their private sanctuary.
You really have to remember what a wild novelty television was in 1953. I mean, there was no scrolling, there were no on-demand feeds.
You just watched what was on.
Exactly. You had this brand new technology delivering a jarring juxtaposition of human experience. Because on one hand, the airwaves are saturated with the grand celebratory pomp of a young queen's coronation.
The golden carriages, the crowns.
Yeah, a battered nation signaling a new era of hope after the sheer devastation of the Second World War. But woven right alongside that pageantry, playing in cinemas and broadcast into those exact same living rooms, is the heavy, traumatic post-war newsreel footage.
Right alongside the royal processions, the networks were continuously broadcasting the harrowing footage of the liberated German concentration camps.
Hard to fathom.
For a 10-year-old boy sitting on the rug, just staring at that screen, the psychological whiplash must have been intense.
Yep.
Alan explicitly notes that he saw this specific war footage taken right at the end of the conflict repeatedly. But out of all the chaotic, terrifying imagery, one specific piece of film from 1945 anchored itself in his mind.
Out of everything he saw.
Yes, it was footage from the Bergen-Belsen camp, showing a young woman getting married to a British officer.
What's fascinating here is the specific detail that captured that young boy's imagination.
The dress.
The dress. It wasn't just the sheer fact of a wedding taking place on the soil of such unimaginable horror. It was the material of her dress. In the footage, Alan learns that this young woman's white wedding dress was fashioned entirely out of a military parachute.
A parachute, an object explicitly manufactured to drop soldiers into violent conflict.
Right. The symbolism is profound. A parachute is utilitarian, it is heavy, it is a tool of invasion and desperate survival. And yet
She wore it to her wedding.
Exactly. In the chaotic wake of the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, this rigid object of war is painstakingly recrafted into a flowing white wedding gown. That act of sewing, of repurposing a military tool into the ultimate symbol of love and a new beginning, represents a complete reclamation of humanity.
It's beautiful.
It really is. And that dress, by the way, is now preserved in a war museum in London.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it stands as a physical testament to the refusal to let a place designed for extermination have the final word. You can easily understand why that specific visual of the parachute bride etched itself into a 10-year-old's brain.
Absolutely. So keep that image in your mind. Now we fast forward 40 years. The year is 1994.
A big jump.
A big jump. Alan is fully grown, and he is working as a professional news cameraman for London News. And it's just a standard afternoon. He gets an assignment, gets in the car with a young reporter, and heads out to Edgware, which is a quiet suburban area in North London.
Very routine.
Completely routine. Their task is simple: go interview an elderly couple. Alan notes a really relatable detail about his profession here. As the person behind the lens, you are almost always the last person to know what the story is actually about.
Right, you're just focused on the gear.
Exactly. You grab the heavy gear, check your batteries, and go to the address on the slip of paper.
It really grounds the story in the mundane reality of his day-to-day life. He isn't on some grand quest. He arrives at this totally unremarkable house in Edgware, and a charming elderly couple opens the door and invites the news crew inside.
Just a normal day at work.
You can just picture Alan setting up his tripod, balancing the camera on his shoulder, checking the audio levels and the focus, just waiting for the young reporter to begin the interview.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Wow.
Because as the interview begins, Alan starts actually listening to the answers this couple is giving.
He starts paying attention to the words.
Right. He is looking through the viewfinder, staring at their faces, and a wave of absolute astonishment washes over him. He realizes that this quiet, elderly couple living in suburban North London is Gina and Norman Turgle.
The Turgles.
They are the parachute bride and the British officer from that 1945 newsreel.
Wow.
He is pointing his camera at the exact same people he watched on his family's glowing television box 4 decades prior.
The sheer statistical anomaly of that encounter is staggering.
It's impossible to calculate.
To be randomly assigned to this specific living room out of millions of addresses in London, decades after witnessing their wedding through a grainy broadcast, it forces you to pause.
It really does.
And what makes this encounter so powerful isn't just the coincidence, but the human reality Alan uncovers once he realizes who he is filming.
Yes, because during the course of this interview, Alan captures an incredibly intimate detail about how they have lived their lives since that newsreel. He learns that Norman buys Gina a dozen red roses every single Friday.
Every single Friday.
Without fail. Week after week, year after year.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, consider the psychological resilience required to maintain that tradition. Gina and Norman met at the literal intersection of absolute human depravity and the moment of liberation.
At Bergen-Belsen.
Yes. They witnessed the darkest depths of what human beings are capable of inflicting on one another. The natural response to surviving that level of trauma would be to harden yourself, to build walls, or to succumb to the heavy shadow of those memories.
To just shut down.
Exactly. Instead, this couple actively, deliberately chose to cultivate beauty. A dozen red roses every single Friday is a quiet, persistent rebellion against the darkness they endured.
Alan is sitting behind his camera, absorbing all of this. And at the end of the interview, he simply cannot keep it to himself.
I wouldn't be able to either.
Right. He steps out from behind the lens and he tells them. He explains that he vividly remembers being a 10-year-old kid sitting in his living room and watching the footage of their wedding.
The moment he says that, the dynamic in the room completely shifts.
The invisible barrier drops.
Exactly. The barrier between the journalist and the subject dissolves. They are no longer just recounting historical facts for a news segment. They are looking at a man whose own life, whose own childhood imagination, was touched by their survival.
And the backstory Gina shares with Alan during this encounter grounds that beautiful image of the parachute dress in a terrifying reality.
It wasn't an easy road to that wedding day.
Not at all. Gina's journey is harrowing. When the German army invaded her home country of Poland, her family was taken prisoner. She didn't just survive one camp, she survived 3.
3 camps.
First was Krakow-Plaszow, then she was sent to Auschwitz, and finally, she endured the death marches to end up in Bergen-Belsen.
Surviving even one of those environments requires an unimaginable will to live and a series of miraculous chances. To survive 3, culminating in the horrors of Auschwitz and Belsen, defies comprehension.
It truly does.
And the specific experiences she shared with Alan regarding her time in Auschwitz are deeply chilling, particularly because of her background.
Yes. Alan explains in his account that Gina had been trained as a young nurse.
Which made her a target for exploitation.
Exactly. When the camp authorities realized she had a medical background, they exploited it. At Auschwitz, Gina was forced to work directly alongside Josef Mengele.
Oh.
She was forced to assist him in his horrifying medical experiments.
Think about the severe moral injury and the psychological terror of that position.
It's unbearable to even imagine.
You have a young woman whose entire professional identity, whose core instinct is dedicated to healing people and alleviating suffering. Under the constant looming threat of her own murder, that instinct is weaponized.
Weaponized against her own people.
Right. She is forced to stand proximate to the intentional, systematic infliction of immense pain. In the audio account, Alan notes that Gina described the experience of being there as both awful and amazing.
Amazing in the worst possible way.
Yes, amazing in the terrifying, mind-bending sense of the word, facing a scale of evil that completely breaks human comprehension.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because the historical intersections in Gina's life don't end there.
They don't.
As they were talking, Alan casually brings up the fact that he believes Anne Frank had been imprisoned in Bergen-Belsen.
A very well-known historical detail now.
Right. And Gina looks at him and reveals a detail that leaves him entirely speechless.
What did she say?
She tells him that not only was Anne Frank in the camp, but in the barracks, Gina's mother was in a cot on one side of Gina, and young Anne Frank was in the cot on the other side.
Oh my goodness.
It's just inches away.
When you hear a detail like that, it radically shifts how you perceive history. We usually encounter figures like Anne Frank through the lens of a globally famous diary or a sanitized school curriculum.
They become almost like characters in a book.
Exactly. They become historical icons, elevated and separated from our daily reality. But Gina strips away that mythology entirely. She places Anne Frank not on a pedestal, but shivering in a wooden cot just a few feet away.
A real person in a real, terrifying place.
It emphasizes the suffocating physical reality of the camps. Millions of individual lives crammed into dark spaces, enduring the exact same nightmare.
And the timeline makes it even more devastating. Anne Frank passed away in early 1945, just a few short months before the British Army, including Norman Turgle, arrived to liberate Bergen-Belsen.
The margins between life and death were so impossibly small.
It highlights this agonizing, razor-thin line between those who survived to build a quiet life in North London and those who perished just weeks before the gates opened.
It is a heavy, overwhelming reality to process in a suburban living room on a Tuesday afternoon.
Very heavy. But what happens next in Alan's account is a testament to the warmth of the Turtles.
They were incredible people.
After sharing these world-altering, heavy truths, Gina and Norman do something remarkably ordinary. As the news crew is packing up their gear, they look at Alan and invite him, along with his wife Lynn, to come back to their house for dinner the following Friday.
From the depths of Auschwitz to a casual Friday night dinner invitation.
Exactly. Alan goes home, tells his wife Lynn this unbelievable story about the parachute bride from his childhood television set, and the next week, they return to Edgware.
And they just have dinner.
Gina cooks a beautiful meal. Alan recalls that he and Lynn just sat at the table in awe, breaking bread with this incredible couple. They didn't treat Alan as a transactional news contact. They welcomed him as a friend.
That dinner represents a profound shift in the story. The camera is gone. It is just four people sitting around a table, bound together by a memory that started as a flickering broadcast 40 years earlier.
And that bond deepened significantly the very next year. On May 2nd, 1995, Gina and Norman invite Alan to join them on an incredibly special, somber journey.
The return trip.
Yes. The local Hendon Jewish synagogue had chartered an aircraft for a day trip to Germany to attend a major memorial service at Bergen-Belsen. Norman and Gina specifically asked Alan, through his company, to accompany them and document their return.
To travel back to the geographical coordinates of your greatest trauma and your salvation is a heavy undertaking. And the sensory details of that return trip are striking. When the British Army liberated the camp in 1945, the conditions were so horrific and the spread of diseases like typhus was so rampant that they were forced to deliberately burn the wooden barracks to the ground just to sanitize the earth.
So when Alan walks onto the grounds of the camp in 1995 with Gina and Norman, he isn't walking through a claustrophobic maze of wooden huts. It's the exact opposite.
Wide open space.
He describes these vast, rolling, empty areas. It is physically empty, but it holds the heaviest emotional weight imaginable.
The silence must have been deafening.
The only structures left are these solemn stone monuments scattered across the grass, marking the mass graves and stating the staggering number of murdered souls buried beneath that specific patch of earth.
The contrast is haunting. The physical architecture of the horror has been erased by fire and time, but the geographical reality of the loss is permanently anchored in stone.
It's anchored right there.
To stand in that wide open space, alongside the very woman who stood there in a parachute dress 50 years prior, and the man who helped secure her freedom, it brings the entire narrative to a profoundly moving resolution.
It is the ultimate full circle moment, and it leads to the final bittersweet chapter of Alan's account. Just a few months after that powerful trip to Germany in 1995, Norman passes away.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
It is. But the connection formed between Alan, his wife Lynn, and Gina remains unbroken. They continue their friendship for over 2 decades, staying close right up until Gina passes away in 2018.
Think about the duration of that bond. Over 20 years of shared dinners and conversations, all sparked by a news assignment and a childhood memory.
Incredible.
Alan mentions a beautiful, tangible artifact of this enduring relationship. Gina eventually wrote a book detailing her life story, and she signed a copy over to Alan and Lynn.
A permanent reminder.
Yes, it serves as a permanent physical keepsake. A book resting on a shelf containing the unimaginable journey of the parachute bride, signed by her own hand, dedicated to the little boy who first saw her on a glowing box in 1953.
So what does this all mean? When you step back and look at the emotional arc of this story, it is breathtaking.
Breathtaking is the word for it.
A 10-year-old boy sees an anonymous woman in a white dress on a grainy screen. He has no idea who she is. Yet, navigating the unpredictable currents of life, he ends up eating at her table 40 years later, travels back to the site of her liberation, and holds a signed testament of her survival, having called her a dear friend for over 2 decades.
It is a powerful reminder that history is not merely a collection of grand sweeping movements, shifting borders, or staggering statistics. We often get lost in the macro-level view of eras and regimes.
It's easy to just see the numbers.
Exactly, but history is intimately constructed from individual, deeply personal stories. It is a heavy military parachute meticulously transformed into a gown.
It's the haunting proximity of 2 cots in a dark room.
And it is the quiet, defiant act of purchasing a dozen red roses every single Friday.
This raises an important question for all of us today. You and I live in an era of relentless, rapid-fire information.
Nonstop.
We swipe through quick videos on our phones, we double-tap passing digital photos, we consume thousands of disjointed images every single day, and the vast majority of them evaporate from our minds the second the screen goes dark.
But if we connect this to what we just discussed, if a fleeting black and white newsreel from 1953 could quietly plant a seed in a young boy's mind, a memory robust enough to forge a profound 20-year friendship decades later, what fragments of our current lives are doing the same?
It really makes you wonder.
What seemingly insignificant digital image, what passing video you watched just this morning, is quietly waiting in the background, destined to connect you to someone else's story 40 years into the future.
That is an incredible thought to carry with you today. You just never know what fleeting image is going to echo back and completely alter the trajectory of your life. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It has been an absolute privilege to share Alan, Gina, and Norman's story with you. We will see you next time.